Have you ever felt like there's something behind it all? Not obvious, not clear, but always there. A strange symbol on the dollar bill. A building with bizarre architecture in the heart of the capital. A politician raising his hand in a gesture you can't explain. A revolution erupting right on cue, as if someone had written the script long before, and then you see the pattern in France, in America, in South America, from the 18th century into the 21st, from constitutions to wars, from ancient temples to modern algorithms. There's nothing solid enough to accuse, but far too much to ignore. Their name is the Freemasons, also known as the Masonic Order. Not a secret society or no, but a society of secrets. They don't rule the world by force. They build it from the shadows through symbols, rituals, philosophy, and a patience that outlives time. You won't find them in your school textbooks, but their traces are in the foundation of every institution. They don't appear when history is written, because they were already there, before anyone picked up a pen. Tonight, Bedtime History invites you on an extraordinary journey, not through the familiar pages of history books, but through the tiny cracks in time, where the real secrets were buried. Together, we'll brush the dust off sealed cathedrals, follow encrypted messages deep underground, listen in on silent battles between the Vatican and hidden orders, and take a closer look at world-changing laws written by hands that left no name behind. This is not a fantasy. This is real, only forgotten by design. And if you're still awake by the end, maybe you'll understand why the greatest builders in history never needed fame. They only needed their creations to stand quietly for centuries. There is no exact moment in history officially marked as the birth of the Freemasons. They appeared before the English Constitution, before the French Revolution, and even before modern maps gave shape to the world. They never announced their arrival. They let history speak for them through symbols. In handwritten manuscripts from medieval England and Scotland, the term Freemason first appeared in the 14th century, not as an organization, but as a status. They were stonemasons who were free, not bound to any local lord, not controlled by the church, and not tied to a single piece of land. They traveled across Europe, building cathedrals, castles, and observatories, carrying with them a strange system of symbols that no one outside their circle could understand, and from there they quietly became a threat. The churches they built were never ordinary. Domes shaped like the all-seeing eye. Spirals aligned to the golden ratio. Octagonal windows that spoke a secret language of geometry. The church began to grow suspicious. These men weren't just building with stone. They were building with ideas. In every brick there was a philosophy not found in the Bible, and when the Knights Templar were destroyed by King Philip IV of France in 1307, not all of them were burned or executed. Some simply disappeared. The survivors were hunted for years. Then suddenly the trail went cold. No bodies, no treasure. But the Red Cross, their symbol, began appearing inside the temples of stonemason guilds in Scotland. A coincidence? There's no solid proof that the last Templars merged with the Masons, but there's no proof to silence the suspicion either, especially when both groups shared a secret structure, coded systems, and unwavering loyalty, not to any king or pope, but to each other. Over time, these Masons no longer held chisels and hammers. They held blueprints, legislative documents, maps. They became anonymous builders, no longer constructing physical monuments, but laying the foundation of a new world order in politics, religion, philosophy, and science. In the earliest draft of the United States Constitution, scholars found phrases, symbols, and language eerily similar to Freemason documents. George Washington was a Mason. So was Benjamin Franklin. At the cornerstone-laying ceremony of the Capitol building, Washington wore a Masonic apron and performed an ancient ritual in front of thousands, none of whom understood the true meaning behind the gesture. And to this day, no one truly understands, because to understand, you have to be inside. The Freemasons don't hide because they're afraid. They hide because they have no need to be seen. No one knows exactly when the Freemasons officially became a secret society. For the first few centuries, they never called themselves that. They were simply the best builders in Europe, and perhaps because of that they were also the first to understand a crucial truth: architecture could hide messages, and those who knew how to hide messages held real power. In 14th century England, certain structures were built that still baffle historians today, not just because of their advanced techniques, but because of the details modern architectural textbooks often overlook. Tiny symbols carved deep into hidden corners, walls aligned with the sun on the winter solstice, and statues that seemed decorative but bore ancient motifs from Egypt or Sumer. They all had one thing in common: they were built by free stonemason guilds. And free didn't just mean free from the control of lords, it meant free in thought. In an era when the church controlled knowledge, when books were burned and thinkers were executed, the stonemasons, trained in geometry, astronomy, mechanics, were among the rare few with access to ancient wisdom. They didn't teach it in schools, they passed it down by word of mouth, through ritual, through symbols. And it was this oral tradition that made the popes uneasy. By the 15th century, lodges began to appear across Europe, not just as meeting places for builders, but as hubs for discussion, research, and the passing on of knowledge outside the Bible: Greek geometry, Hermetic philosophy, Babylonian astrology, even Hebrew Kabbalah translations. To the outside world, this was heresy, but within stone walls, it was science. Then something strange happened. Over time, fewer actual builders attended these lodges. Instead came scholars, lawyers, physicians, nobles, even royalty. They weren't there to learn how to shape stone. They came to learn how to shape something else: power in silence. This was the turning point. The Freemasons evolved from a trade guild into a mysterious philosophical order. The masters no longer measured foundations, they measured the structure of society. The apprentices no longer cut stone, they carved through layers of outdated thought in search of a new light. And that light, in Masonic philosophy, wasn't the light of religion, but the light of reason. They didn't broadcast themselves, but they didn't hide either, because to them the world didn't need to know who built it, as long as it stood strong. And from that moment on, the heads of churches, kings, and aristocrats began to grow uneasy, because power no longer sat solely on thrones. It had begun to flow silently, through midnight meetings, secret oaths, and invisible blueprints of a world being rebuilt from within. If you've ever stepped into an old European cathedral, chances are you've seen them without even realizing it. They didn't carve their names into stone, they didn't leave signatures, but they left symbols. And to those who know how to see, these buildings were never just places of worship. They were massive encrypted codes. The Freemasons understood something few others did. Stone could speak. Every arch, every carving, every statue guarding a church door was placed with intention. Those majestic Gothic structures weren't just feats of craftsmanship. They were vessels of philosophy, belief, and ancient knowledge, encoded. One famous example is Chartres Cathedral in France. To this day, modern scholars still can't explain why the cathedral's facade is tilted exactly 37 degrees off the north-south axis, or why its stained glass windows depict both Jewish Kabbalah, symbols, and ancient Greek geometry. Some say it's all coincidence. But when every sacred building shares the same coincidences, it's no longer random. Even the columns speak. In many old churches, pillars bear the cross of the Templars, the five-pointed star, or the compass and square. Worshippers pass by without a glance, but Masons recognize them instantly. These are markers, directions, confirmations that say, "This is our work." It's no surprise that the most architecturally strange buildings often stood where Freemason lodges thrived. At Rosslyn Chapel, in Scotland, the sanctuary holds nearly 100 stone carvings, from Templar crosses to figures that seem to depict symbols from the Americas, long before Columbus ever set sail. Who placed them there? And why? The answer lies in the Masonic philosophy of architecture. The physical world is only the shell. The true world lies within, in the shapes, the proportions, the silent arrangements. They believed architecture wasn't just for shelter, it was ritual. To build a church wasn't merely to raise a roof, it was to erect a vertical bridge between heaven and earth. So, to place even one stone incorrectly was an offense. To add unnecessary decoration was to betray the philosophy, and to overlook a symbol was to lose a chance to pass on ancient knowledge to those who could read with a third eye. The Vatican didn't need to fully understand to feel uneasy. In the realm of religious power, anything outside official doctrine was a threat. And when builders started becoming guardians of forgotten wisdom, they were no longer servants of the church. They became rivals. It's no coincidence that after plagues and wars, many Masonic structures were renovated, altered, or torn down. Symbols were chiseled off, hidden doors sealed shut, but stone doesn't go silent easily. Beneath fresh paint, the old marks remain. And for those patient enough, that hidden world can still be read, line by line, layer by layer, in the language of stone that still remembers how to speak. In the grey October morning of 1307, almost every Knight Templar in France was arrested, all at once. Under the direct order of King Philip IV and with the suspicious silence of Pope Clement V, a force once considered untouchable was suddenly accused of heresy, sorcery, and devil worship. Many were tortured to death, others were burned alive in the public squares of Paris, and their last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake on the banks of the Seine, cursing both the king and the Pope with his final breath, swearing they would both die within the year, and they did. But what's even stranger is this. Not all the knights were captured, and the legendary treasure of the Templars was never found. No gold, no holy relics, no secret manuscripts, no bodies. Then just a few years later, in Scotland, new symbols began appearing in the stonemason guilds. A red cross, a downward-pointing sword, a conical helmet, and, curiously, a name whispered in internal legends. Molay. Mainstream history has long tried to keep two worlds apart. The Knights Templar and the Freemasons. One, a religious military order. The other, a guild of builders, but when you look closely at their structure, rituals, code names, and symbols, the similarities become difficult to ignore. Both had hierarchical ranks, initiation ceremonies, secret oaths, and a belief in a light beyond traditional religion. Both operated like borderless nations, autonomous, secretive, and fiercely loyal to their own. So what if a part of the Templar order wasn't erased, but simply transformed? Some scholars believe that after the Purge, surviving Templars fled across the sea to Scotland, a land not fully under Catholic control. There they didn't just hide, they lived, they worked, and slowly they blended into the stonemason guilds. Not to build homes, but to rebuild a new order. The first traces of this theory appear in ancient Masonic documents from Edinburgh, referencing a Brotherhood of the Temple, with symbols identical to the Templar cross. Lodges in France, Scotland, and Switzerland have long preserved nightly rites nearly identical to Templar ceremonies of old. Then, by the 17th century, a new concept began surfacing within Freemasonry. Templar Masonry, no longer just builders. They were knights hidden within the modern world. They wore no armor but carried purpose. They held no swords but still fought, with knowledge, influence, and silent designs. Even more unsettling, the Vatican knew. In several internal church documents from the 18th century, the term Neo-Templarism was listed as a growing threat among Europe's intellectual elite, an invisible force carrying the old ideals of the temple, now cloaked. In the robes of scholars, engineers, lawyers, and nobles, the question is no longer, are the Freemasons connected to the Templars, but rather, if they are, what exactly are they continuing? And more importantly, why has no one been able to stop them? October 13, 1307, a Friday, sent a chill through all of France. Under a secret arrest warrant prepared in silence for months, hundreds of Knights Templar were seized simultaneously in the dead of night. Once known as the Church's armed hand, these men were dragged from monasteries, shackled in iron, and charged with heresy, sorcery, and treason. No warning, no fair trials. But the true cruelty wasn't the bloodshed. It was the silent consent of all Europe. King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the Templars, orchestrated the plan to eliminate the very force that once protected the Holy Land. Pope Clement V, though reluctant, turned a blind eye, because the Templars had become a power of their own, no longer controllable through scripture alone. The leaders were tortured into confession. They were forced to say they worshipped Baphomet, spat on the cross, and practiced dark rituals in secret. But no proof was ever presented. Most of the confessions were drawn from mouths crushed and bones shattered. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was burned at the stake in March 1314. Right before the flames took him, he rejected every accusation. And, with his final breath, he declared, "The Pope and the King will answer to God before the year is out." They both died within the year, but something far more terrifying than fire was the disappearance of everything no one could control. Historians estimate thousands of Templars existed across Europe at the time, yet the arrests focused mainly on France and a few surrounding regions. In England, Scotland, Portugal, they vanished. No battles, no resistance. They simply disappeared as if they had never been. And with them went untold treasures, gold, manuscripts, maps, relics. Nothing was recovered, nothing was seized. Then out of that silence, something strange began. In the very regions that once housed the Templars, stonemason guilds began to rise. They welcomed men who once served God, knights without a cross, and those who swore silence unto death. Later Mason records mention strangers from the south, men who didn't build with stone, but understood the symbols and philosophies like few others did. Around this same time, new rituals emerged in Scottish and French Masonic lodges. Vows taken in darkness, a sword resting on the shoulder, and a whispered declaration, "I renounce the cross, but keep the light." That was no longer the vow of a builder. It was the vow of an order once hunted, now reborn with a new mask. The Templar Purge shook Europe, but in doing so it created a historical void, a space for old ideas to survive in new forms. The surviving knights didn't need to break out of prisons, because they were never caged. They only needed to change their face. And from there, they began to build again. Not with swords, but with symbols. They were no longer the Templar order, but they were never ordinary men. They were the ones who weren't burned, because they knew how to live beneath the stone. An outsider could stand in a room filled with Masonic symbols and see nothing unusual, but to an insider, every detail carries meaning, and more importantly, power. In the world of Freemasonry, symbols aren't just signs, they're language, and that's exactly why they are feared. The most well-known symbol of the Freemasons is the compass and square, two foundational tools of the building trade. But in the hands of a Mason, they're more than instruments of measurement. They become representations of cosmic order and human morality. The compass represents the spirit, the ability to measure the intangible, thought, intellect, conscience. It draws the circle, a symbol of the infinite, of creation without beginning or end. The square represents the physical, the real, the grounded, the laws that govern matter. It draws the right angle, a symbol of integrity, balance, and boundary. Between them lies the letter G, often said to stand for God or geometry. But many scholars believe it carries a double meaning, and suggesting that God, in Masonic belief, is not a personal deity but a great architect, a higher force that created the laws of the universe through geometry and mathematics. And it's at this point that Freemasonry diverges from traditional religion. They do not worship God as the Catholic Church defines him. They do not seek salvation through blind faith. They honor knowledge, logical thought, and the inner order of the cosmos. To the Church, this is heresy. Because if God is no longer the sole divine authority, but instead a mathematical principle, then the Church's entire structure of power collapses. But even more threatening is another symbol, the all-seeing eye. This symbol appears in many ancient civilizations. The Egyptians called it the Eye of Horus. In Hinduism, it's the third eye, but when the Freemasons placed it atop a pyramid on the US $1 bill, it became something else, a silent declaration of unseen power. That eye does not blink, it does not sleep. It belongs to no church, no crown, no army. It watches from above, beyond all systems of control, and that is something the Vatican could not tolerate. Because in church doctrine, only God is all-seeing. But the Freemasons claimed that true light comes from knowledge, and that those who learn the language of the universe can see everything. To the popes, this was sacred blasphemy, a form of divine rebellion. It's no coincidence that starting in the 18th century, the Vatican issued decree after decree excommunicating anyone who joined the Freemasons. Members caught were denied confession, denied burial in sacred ground, and declared lost to God's grace. And yet the more the Church banned them, the stronger the Freemasons grew. The forbidden symbols didn't disappear. They were carved into government buildings, printed on currency, hung in courtrooms, even etched into the halls of major universities. Some say these are just historical remnants, but to those who understand, they are markers, a quiet reminder that the builders never left. They are still watching, like the all-seeing eye, silent but never far from the order they helped shape. From the medieval era to the modern age, the Roman Catholic Church did not tolerate the existence of any organization outside its control, because the Church was never just a religion, it was politics, absolute authority, the ideological center of all Europe. And anything that threatened that structure, even silently, was treated as heresy. The Freemasons, though they began simply as a guild of builders, quickly drew the Church's suspicion, not through violence, but through philosophy. They did not challenge the Church with swords or sermons, but with symbols, with ideas, and with a way of understanding the world that required no divine permission. That terrified the Vatican. In 1738, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull, In Eminenti Apostolatus Specula, declaring that any Catholic who joined the Freemasons would be excommunicated. It was the first time the Church had openly and severely condemned a non-religious organization. What's more striking, the bull offered no specific evidence of wrongdoing, only the claim that this secret society operates in darkness, disturbing religious and civil order. That alone revealed how the Vatican saw them, as an invisible enemy in an unseen war. After Clement V, nearly every pope reaffirmed the ban. From Providas by Benedict XV to Humanum Genus by Leo X, the Freemasons were portrayed as the embodiment of a dangerous philosophy, one rooted in reason, science, and intellectual freedom. All things the Church had fought to contain for centuries. During the Age of Enlightenment, as thinkers like Voltaire, Diderot, and Montesquieu, many of them Freemasons, openly questioned the Church's power. The Vatican faced a disturbing truth. The Freemasons had not only survived the Dark Ages, they were leading the charge to dismantle religious influence from modern thought. Then came the French Revolution in 1789. Its rallying cry, liberty, equality, fraternity, sounded familiar to those who knew Masonic rituals. They were in fact the same three core principles taught during the Masons' first-degree initiation. Coincidence? Or a declaration? To the Vatican, it confirmed a long-brewing suspicion. A hidden force was working quietly, peeling away the Church's grip on politics, law, and education, layer by layer, without war, without blood, yet with frightening efficiency. Under papal pressure, many Catholic countries outlawed Freemasonry. Lodges were raided, members were arrested. But instead of being destroyed, the Masons simply went underground. They didn't vanish, they evolved. Under the guise of academies, research institutes, political clubs, they spread. From Paris to New York, from Vienna to Havana, and what terrified the Vatican even more, some of their own began to be drawn in. Priests, cardinals, even bishops were quietly discovered to have ties to Masonic lodges, sometimes as official members. They never spoke of it publicly, but they existed. Leaked documents later revealed that during the 19th century, at least 3 Jesuit cardinals had attended Masonic meetings as intellectual observers. The question was no longer, do the Freemasons really exist, but rather, where have they been while we were trying to destroy them? And the answer was chillingly simple. They never left. When the Church couldn't destroy ideas, it turned to destroying the places where those ideas were carved. For the Freemasons, their knowledge was never stored in books. It was inscribed in stone. From the 17th century onward, a strange pattern emerged across Europe. Dozens of religious and secular buildings were suddenly renovated, closed down, or simply vanished from administrative records. No clear reasons. No official bans. But keen observers noticed one unsettling commonality. These were all sites marked with traces of Masonic influence. One striking example, St. Ninian's Church in Stirling, Scotland. For over 3 centuries, it was revered as one of the oldest missionary centers in the Highlands. But later, scholars discovered something unusual beneath the altar: a carved compass and square surrounded by a circular pattern of Latin numerals, arranged with geometric precision. What stood out, the engraving wasn't oriented toward Jesus, but toward Sirius, the central star in many ancient Masonic rituals. A few years after this detail appeared in an academic paper, Saint-Nignon's was permanently closed for architectural restoration. But the restoration was never completed. The main entrance was sealed, the bell tower dismantled. No one was allowed near the underground chamber again, and no one ever spoke of the carvings again. It wasn't just Scotland. In Spain, the San Juan de la Peña Monastery, once a major pilgrimage site, saw its restoration budget abruptly cut in the 1800s after a strange stone slab was discovered behind the altar. The slab featured the letter G encircled by flames, with the Latin phrase lux ex tenebris, light from the darkness. Historians later identified it as one of the oldest known Masonic mottos. In France, numerous abbeys in the Languedoc region were demolished in the 19th century without war, natural disaster, or visible decay. All of them had one thing in common: they had once been active centers for stoneworker guilds after the fall of the Templars, and all of them bore architectural features, domes, columns, crypts, marked with symbols not found in Christian iconography, but part of a distinct geometric language. These structures weren't just erased physically, they were removed from history itself. Maps were altered, photographs went missing, documents were redacted or revised, even those involved in the restorations were reassigned or silenced completely. In many cases, the buildings weren't destroyed, they were repurposed. Masonic lodges were handed over to charities, religious schools, or state offices under the banner of serving the public. But every Mason symbol on the walls, doors, and ceilings was painted over or chiseled away. In some places, new saints were installed, new altars erected, as if to overwrite the past with fresh layers of righteousness. And through all of it, no one offered an explanation, no trials, no public accusations, no official reports, only silence. A long, organized silence, a kind of forgetting by design. As always, the Freemasons did not respond. They made no protests, filed no claims. They simply withdrew, quietly, taking their symbols elsewhere, and continued building. But the sealed sanctuaries still stand. Though their original forms may be lost, they remain beneath the surface. Beneath the bricks, beneath the paint, beneath the pretending, the stone remembers. And for those who know how to look, those buildings still whisper the story of the builders without names. Jerusalem, 12th century. While Europe was still shrouded in superstition and religious wars, the Knights Templar, officially sanctioned by the Pope, were carrying out an operation few would have imagined, an excavation beneath one of the oldest sacred sites in the Middle East, the Temple of Solomon. It was here, according to later accounts and whispers in ancient texts, that they discovered a series of ancient scrolls, not ordinary biblical scriptures, but manuscripts written in ancient Hebrew, accompanied by geometric diagrams, mathematical formulas, and cosmic models based on principles entirely foreign to Christian doctrine. These manuscripts were never made public. No originals exist in the Vatican's archives, no copies in any major library. Yet fragments appear in the early internal writings of certain Masonic lodges in Scotland and France, passages said to be translated from the originals found in Jerusalem. What's striking is this: the texts contained no religious doctrine. Instead, they spoke of a geometric order to the universe, of a balance between opposites, and of an inner light that human beings could awaken through knowledge. No prayers, no sacrifices, only understanding. This raised serious questions for scholars. Could it be that the Templars, during their time in Jerusalem, had access to a spiritual legacy older than Judaism itself? Perhaps from Egypt, Babylon, or even Sumer. If so, then Freemasonry may be the vessel that carried those shattered fragments of ancient wisdom forward. In several high-degree Masonic rituals, we find motifs nearly identical to those found on the walls of the Temple of Luxor, or etched into Akkadian clay tablets. Symbols like the double spiral, the 12-segmented diagonal, or the twin triangles, one pointing upward, one downward, appear in both traditions, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. Some of the oldest Masonic maps mark Jerusalem not as a holy city, but as the point of origin of the light. Not Rome, not Athens, Jerusalem. The place crusaders bled for, not just to claim land, but to uncover something buried beneath the stone. And if these scrolls did exist, then the Church's determination to destroy the Templars becomes more understandable. Not because of treasure, but because of knowledge. Because if mankind believes that light comes from within, not from the Bible, not from the Pope, then the foundation of the Church begins to crumble at its core. After the Templar purge, the scrolls disappeared from all official records, but they began to live again inside secret lodges disguised as lectures, rituals, and hidden symbols. Students didn't read them. They were passed down through symbols, through ritual sequence, through silence. The Freemasons have never confirmed nor denied the story of the Jerusalem scrolls, but everything they've left behind, in architecture, in philosophy, points to a knowledge system not born in universities, not written in textbooks, and never blessed by the Vatican. A system of knowledge that may very well trace its roots back to the very place where God Himself was crucified. If there is one word repeated more than any other in the rituals and writings of the Freemasons, it is this: light. Not God, not salvation, but light, as an absolute truth, a supreme goal, and a state of being every member must strive to reach. But light in the Masonic world is no mere metaphor. It doesn't simply represent truth. It is the fabric of the universe itself, a current of awareness, thought, and order. While traditional religions claim that light comes from the outside, from God, from Scripture, from divine revelation, Freemasonry proclaims the opposite. Light comes from within. It arises when reason awakens and the darkness of superstition is torn away. A candidate entering the Masonic path begins in darkness, both literally and symbolically. They are blindfolded, guided in silence, faced with questions, challenges, and a vow not to be taken lightly. And then, at the right moment, the blindfold is removed. They see the light, but it is not the light of a deity. It is the light of knowledge, of awareness, of realizing that the world is no longer as obscure as it once seemed. This is where Masonic philosophy directly collides with the ideology of the Vatican, because if man can attain light on his own, without the Church, then the entire system built to mediate between God and believers becomes unnecessary. Masonic philosophy draws from ancient traditions: Hermeticism from Egypt, Kabbalah from Blue, Jewish mysticism, Pythagorean thought from Greece, and echoes of Eastern philosophy. All of them share a single belief that the universe is understandable, not through blind faith, but but through observation, comparison, and the endless pursuit of learning. Light is the fruit of that journey. It is not granted. It cannot be taken away. It appears only when one is humble enough to ask questions and brave enough to reject ready-made answers. Conversely, darkness in Masonic thought does not equal evil. Darkness is the unknown. It is the absence of knowledge. It is the natural state in which all people begin, before they choose to seek, to explore, and to reconstruct their own understanding of the world. No one is condemned for being in darkness. Only when one refuses to seek the light do they begin to lose themselves. That's why Freemasonry never forces belief. They do not preach. They do not promise heaven. They ask only one question before accepting someone into the craft. Do you desire the light? The answer requires no words. Only one act to enter the darkness and find your way out with your eyes truly open. And for that reason, they need no myths. They need no miracles, only those courageous enough to break through walls of dogma and stare directly into the nature of existence. In the 17th century, as ships crossed the Atlantic carrying waves of European migrants to the New World, people often spoke of religion, poverty, and dreams of land. But something else boarded those ships, something not packed in trunks, not listed on any manifest and never inspected by customs. It was an idea. The Freemasons never issued a formal declaration of migration, but their members, builders, scholars, nobles, engineers, and dissenting intellectuals, were among the first to set foot on American soil. They carried not only technical knowledge, but a philosophy of light, a belief in personal enlightenment, and a conviction in the geometric order of society. Most importantly, they brought symbols. As early as the first decades of the British colonies, Masonic lodges began to appear in Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Quietly, without fanfare, but they were well organized, resilient, and growing. Not just meeting places, but centers for shaping ideology. By the 18th century, as tensions rose against British rule, those lodges became gathering spaces for a new generation of American thinkers: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, John Hancock, all Freemasons. They did not organize to start a war. They organized to redesign order. When the Declaration of Independence was drafted, few noticed that its structure reflected distinctly Masonic principles: personal liberty, reason as a foundation, and the belief that people, not kings or churches, are the ultimate authors of history. But the Masonic imprint on America wasn't only written, it was carved into stone, into architecture, into symbols. The capital, Washington, D.C., was planned by Pierre Charles L'Enfant, a French-born Mason. Its streets were laid out with deliberate geometry, converging lines, perfect angles, equilateral triangles, axial symmetry. The positioning of the Capitol, the White House, and the Washington Monument follows ancient principles no ordinary city of the time would dare apply. At the cornerstone-laying ceremony of the Capitol, George Washington, in the newly elected first president, wore a Masonic apron, a triangular hat, and performed the ritual as prescribed by the lodge. No one objected. No one questioned it, because by then Freemasonry was no longer a secret society. It was the invisible glue of a nation building itself from the ground up. Even the US $1 bill, so common it's often overlooked, is a compact Masonic manifesto. The reverse of the Great Seal features an unfinished pyramid capped by the all-seeing eye. Below it, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. Not the king's order, not the Pope's order, but one designed by awakened minds. No one has officially claimed the Freemasons built America, but America, from its foundations to its ideas, bears their fingerprints through armies, not through sermons, but by embedding geometric principles, philosophical truths, and powerful symbols into every cornerstone, every constitution, every column of stone. And as always, they never asked for credit. They simply stepped back, building, then fading into the background, because for them, true legacy isn't found in fame. It lies in a world that still stands, on a blueprint almost no one ever saw. In the summer of 1787, inside a modest building on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, 55 delegates from 13 states gathered in secret for months to draft the first Constitution of the United States. Windows were sealed shut, curtains drawn tight. Passers-by heard nothing, and no outsiders were allowed in. History calls it the Constitutional Convention. But to the observant, it was something more, a founding ritual orchestrated by unseen hands. Among the delegates, more than half were Freemasons. George Washington, who presided over the convention, was a high-ranking Mason. Benjamin Franklin, a cornerstone of Enlightenment thought, was the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. They did not just share political ideals, they shared a secret language, albeit a system of symbols, ciphers, and rituals known only within the lodge. Later historians, when granted access to unpublished handwritten drafts, found something unusual. In the margins of notes by Franklin and Hamilton, there were inscriptions in a geometric script, not Caesar ciphers, not Latin, but a code used only in the higher degrees of Masonry. Symbols like the double triangle, the stylized G, and intersecting spirals, never found in official government records, but deeply rooted in Masonic ciphertexts. One particular memo, discovered in the Library of Congress in 1932, bore two cryptic lines beneath Franklin's signature. "There is no light without darkness. Place the eye where the pyramid remains unfinished. It has never been officially explained, yet soon after the all-seeing eye appeared on the Great Seal of the United States, and the pyramid, a symbol of ongoing construction, became a permanent fixture on the U.S. $1 bill, a silent reminder that this nation is forever under construction. It is no coincidence that the U.S. Constitution, the oldest active political document in the world, was crafted in silence in a city that housed the largest Masonic lodge in the country. It is no accident that the ideas of order, balance of powers, and separation of branches mirror the Masonic principle of equilibrium among opposing forces in sacred geometry. Outside the official convention, Masonic members held a private ceremony, a symbolic cornerstone laying never recorded in formal proceedings. That stone, according to descendants of one delegate, was placed at the intersection of two major city axes, and to this day its exact location has never been disclosed. There are things never written into history books, there are symbols never officially explained, yet they remain in the heart of Philadelphia, etched into facades, woven into the geometric layout of streets, and embedded in the very system by which this nation was designed to function, like a machine crafted by an invisible architect. To the Freemasons, America was never just a promised land. It was an unfinished blueprint, and each generation, knowingly or not, still lives within that design, moving piece by piece along the path laid by symbols placed there since the very first day. The Freemasons have long claimed they are not a political organization. They don't run nations, they don't plot violence, and much of the modern world believes that, or pretends to. But if that were entirely true, why have so many people died simply for trying to understand them? In 1826, a man named William Morgan in New York State announced plans to publish the first book, detailing the inner rituals of the Freemasons in America. He wasn't an outsider. He was a former member, expelled from the lodge for dishonorable conduct. According to his publisher, the book revealed everything: the oaths, the hierarchy, the initiation process, and the philosophical goals of the organization at that time. Just days before the book was set to be printed, Morgan was arrested on vague charges of debt. Soon after, he vanished from jail. No trial, no transfer records, no trace. His wife was told he had been released, but no one ever saw him again. Not even a body was found. The incident sparked national outrage and led to the creation of the Anti-Masonic Party, one of the first political movements in the US to challenge secret powers. Yet just a few years later, the party quietly disbanded. Its supporters faded away. Some lost their positions, others met with accidents. No one could prove the Freemasons were behind it. But the question lingered: why is it that those who get too close to this organization, unless they rejoin it, either disappear or fall apart? In Europe, the story wasn't much different. In 1897, French historian Léo Taxil shocked the press by claiming he had infiltrated high-level Masonic circles and uncovered demonic rituals involving Baphomet. But a few years later, he suddenly confessed that it had all been fabricated, a strange reversal after publishing hundreds of pages, photographs, and testimonies. Some believed he had been threatened, others thought the confession itself was the real lie, a desperate escape from ending up like William Morgan. In the 20th century, Italian journalist Mino Pecorelli, known for investigating ties between the secretive P2 Masonic Lodge and top Italian politicians, was shot. Dead on a street in Rome in 1979, no killer was ever found. Months before his death, he had said in an interview, "There are buildings that if you walk into them on the wrong day, you won't walk out." What ties these cases together? No evidence, no confessions, no thorough investigation. Just a trail that grows cold, as if the truth itself dissolves when it hits a wall no one dares to breach. The Freemasons have never denied these stories, but they've never explained them either. They remain silent, as they always have. There is a saying in Masonic philosophy: those who are not ready for the light should remain in darkness. But that leads to a darker question. What happens when someone sees too much light and they're not one of them? History has never offered a clear answer, but whispers persist. Sometimes death is the only permanent silence. And for the Freemasons, silence has always been their most effective response. Most people who've heard of the Freemasons are familiar with the number 33. In the official ranking system, especially within the Scottish Rite, the 33rd degree is the highest, reserved for those with extraordinary service to the order. But few realize that 33 is only the highest rank. The public is allowed to know. Beyond that number lies something deeper, a level with no official records, no ritual map, and no written rules, only whispers, only by invitation. And once you're in, there's no returning the same way you came there. Known as the Shadow Council, a group of individuals with no formal titles, absent from any Grand Lodge, yet holding immense influence over the direction and philosophy of the entire fraternity. They don't lead by command, but by orientation. They don't govern through rules, but through symbols. In ancient manuscripts, particularly those preserved in Old French and German lodges, that there are vague references to the silent architects. They are beyond rank because they were never within it. They come from nowhere because they never left the center. Some internal Mason legends describe that after the 33rd degree, one may, if chosen, enter an entirely different circle of ritual, one without light, without public symbols, stripped of pageantry, only raw intellect, minimal rites, and a vow that must never be written. In this final ceremony, the initiate stands before a bare table. No emblems, no candles, no saints. Just one question is asked. Are you willing to abandon the light to truly understand the darkness? It's not a metaphor. It's a threshold. Those who step into the shadow council are no longer guided. They become the ones shaping thought, not just within Masonry, but across institutions beyond. They rarely appear as Freemasons. They are politicians, scholars, professors, global fund directors, or simply names no one knows. But when decisions must be made, they're in the room. There's no official list of members. No one confirms their existence. But documents, leaked during the investigation into Italy's P2 Lodge, as well as the writings of historian James Anderson, author of the 1723 Masonic Constitution, subtly suggest true decisions do not lie in the hands of Grand Masters. And if you ask who truly runs Freemasonry worldwide, the most honest answer is no one knows, but precisely for that reason. Many suspect that someone or some group does. The Shadow Council doesn't attend public ceremonies, they don't pose for photos, they don't give speeches, they leave no trace, but their influence filters down quietly, through shifts in doctrine, through changes in ritual, and sometimes through a lodge that suddenly shuts down a senior member who abruptly disappears, or an ancient symbol that's replaced without explanation. In Masonic philosophy, light is the beginning, but once you've seen all the light there is, what remains is darkness. A place with no illusions, no symbols, no limits, only the raw truth. And the ultimate question: are you ready to face it? When an empire feels its throne beginning to shake, it doesn't wait for collapse to act. The Vatican, more than anyone, understands this truth. For over 2 centuries, the Catholic Church had issued papal bulls excommunicating Freemasonry, yet the Brotherhood didn't wither. It spread. Like an invisible spiritual network, what once began as a guild of stonemasons now had roots in politics, law, academia, and, most alarmingly, within the deepest layers of the Holy See itself. From the 18th to the 20th century, internal reports began to reveal a disturbing trend. Cardinals, priests, even bishops were suspected of being Freemasons, or at least influenced by Masonic philosophy. They didn't renounce the faith, they didn't come forward, but they asked questions. They spoke of reason, of intellectual freedom, of light coming from within. And to the Vatican, that was enough to mark them as enemies. The counter-strike didn't come with fire or fury. The Church didn't burn lodges, it didn't send inquisitors. Instead, it deployed a much more precise weapon: the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, scholars, strategists, missionaries, and some of the Church's most formidable minds in philosophy and psychology. The Jesuits didn't attack the surface. They went for the core, Masonic philosophy. In seminaries and theological academies, they launched systematic education to dismantle Masonic ideas at the root. They taught that light found by man is arrogance, that freedom cannot exist outside God's framework, that architecture cannot replace revelation. Every argument was crafted to disarm the symbolic and intellectual foundations. Freemasonry promoted, meanwhile, the Vatican-activated covert operations. Declassified files from Italy, Spain, and France later revealed the existence of special investigative units, often led by ultra-conservative cardinals, tasked with compiling secret lodge lists, monitoring suspect clergy, and tracing Masonic influence within Catholic charities. From those investigations, blacklists were created, priests spotted at Masonic events, Theologians publishing works echoing Templar ideals, architects designing churches with strange geometric layouts. They were all flagged. Some were quietly stripped of position, others were transferred to remote parishes. A few simply vanished from administrative records. The tension climaxed in 1884 when Pope Leo XIII issued the encyclical Humanum Genus, calling Freemasonry the kingdom of darkness, diametrically opposed to the kingdom of Christ. He didn't merely label them heretical. He accused them of plotting to overthrow Christian civilization by spreading relativism, atheism, and false freedom. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of ideological war. Freemasons, as always, did not respond. No press statements, no rebuttals. They simply continued, holding rites, opening lodges, passing on philosophy, quietly, in their way. No need to argue, those meant to understand would find their way, but for the Vatican, silence like that was unacceptable. In the Church's worldview, silence is the boldest form of power. Then, in the modern era, when many thought the confrontation had cooled, an explosive scandal erupted in Italy. The P2 Lodge case, a secret lodge linked to politicians, the Vatican Bank, and a network of elites. The documents uncovered showed Masonic infiltration reaching the very core of the Holy See's religious and financial structure. The war never ended, it simply changed form. One side bears the cross, the other the compass and square. And between them lies a world that's never been allowed to see the whole truth. On August 15, 1806, beneath the golden sunlight of Paris, tens of thousands gathered at Place de l'Étoile for a grand event, the ceremonial laying of the first stone of the Arc de Triomphe, a monument to Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte's glorious victory at Austerlitz. The newspapers called it a political spectacle. The aristocracy saw it as a tribute to the empire. But in the front rows sat a small group, not in military uniform, not wearing royal insignias, moving in quiet formation, exchanging glances of silent understanding. They hadn't come to celebrate conquest. They had come for the ritual. Beneath the surface of this national ceremony, a purely Masonic rite took place. Not public, not hidden, simply unspoken. The first stone of the Arc de Triomphe wasn't laid by royal architects. It was laid by Jean-Baptiste Rondelet, a renowned architect and a high-ranking Freemason in France. According to eyewitness accounts, before the stone was placed, he laid a white apron on the altar. Then, with two others, believed to be members of Lodge Paris, he performed a quiet ritual. 3 taps of the hammer, 3 circular steps, and a short phrase that was never recorded. Then the stone was lowered. Inside it, according to Freemason legend, a copper cylinder was hidden, containing geometric diagrams and Masonic symbols. A seed, in their words, planted within the heart of a royal monument. The Arc de Triomphe, on the surface, is a symbol of military triumph. But from above, the layout of the entire Étoile area forms a 12-pointed star, a design with no clear technical reason, yet perfectly aligned with the Masonic dodecagram, a symbol of cosmic order and historical cycles. Question remains. Did Napoleon know? He never declared himself a Freemason, but nearly all his inner circle, from Joseph Bonaparte to Joachim Murat, and many political and military advisors, were members of the lodge. Napoleon allowed the establishment of hundreds of Masonic lodges across France and occupied Europe. He neither interfered nor controlled. He let them grow, a parallel network alongside the official state machinery. In a letter to his brother in 1805, Napoleon wrote, "Ideas need weapons to survive, but weapons do not create ideas. I need builders, not just of stone, but of ideals." There's no direct evidence he was referring to Freemasons. But for those who understand how he operated, restructuring Europe not through the cross, but through the Napoleonic Code, secular education, and geometric governance, the answer seems clear. The ceremony ended in applause, fireworks, and patriotic cheers. People remembered the victory. But within the crowd, a small group slipped away quietly, leaving before the final blessing. They didn't come to witness history. They came to carve it into stone, quite literally. And from that day on, the Arc de Triomphe became more than just a monument of France. It became a Freemason structure hidden beneath a veil of glory, where symbols and geometry continue to stand silently in the heart of Paris, unnoticed by almost everyone. If you've ever wandered through a major city, Paris, London, or New York, and passed by an old-style building with a silent stone facade, no signs, no lights, and sometimes no windows at all, you've just walked past a living mystery. Locals rarely pay attention. Some call it a technical facility, a storage building, or some kind of government office. But no one really knows what it's for. No one sees anyone go in or out. No sounds, no emergency exits. And strangest of all, they're never torn down even when the entire neighborhood is being redeveloped. To those who study symbolism and underground architecture, these are known as Freemason anchor points, structures that don't exist to be used, but to hold the rhythm of a system. One of the most well-known examples is 23 Rue de la Tombe Issoire in Paris. Its granite black facade has no windows, just a single wooden door, with no handle. Residents nearby have said, "We've never seen anyone enter or leave." City records list the building as non-residential, yet it isn't taxed, and it's never listed for sale. Satellite imaging by geometry researchers reveals the building stands exactly at the intersection of three ancient lodges in Paris, like a point of origin. Some theories claim it holds nothing inside, because it is the symbol, a signal stone quietly embedded within the heart of the modern city. In London, on Great Queen Street near the Grand Lodge of England, there's a three-story building, with smooth walls, no windows, just a narrow slot on the ground floor, no sign, no bell, no camera. But once a year, on June 24th, the feast of St. John the Baptist, the patron saint of Freemasonry, its door opens for only a few minutes. No one is allowed in. Those who enter wear plain white shirts, carry nothing, and say nothing. In New York, near the financial district, stands a limestone tower labeled 33 Thomas Street. It was once known as an AT&T switching center, but in Cold War transmission maps it carried the code name Titan Point, the starting point of a global surveillance network. Investigative journalists believe it served as a hub for encrypted transmissions, not just for the government, but also tied to high-ranking lodges across the United States. But the deeper question is, why no windows? In Masonic architecture, windows symbolize light, the kind of knowledge meant to be shared, but some structures aren't meant for sharing. They don't bring light outward because they contain things meant only for those who are ready to leave the light and understand the dark. It's not just architecture, it's philosophy. Someone once said, when a Masonic building has no windows, it means it doesn't look out into the world. It means the world isn't meant to look in. Some believe these buildings store archives, artifacts, or secret maps, but the truth is, many of them contain absolutely nothing. They're designed to exist, not to function. like silent notes in the city's grand symphony. They hold the rhythm of what no one sees. And one day, if every lodge is watched, if every ritual is monitored, if Freemasonry is forced into the light, it will be these windowless buildings they return to, because in those places nothing is seen and nothing needs to be. In ordinary organizations, people use their real names to assert who they are. But within Freemasonry, anonymity isn't avoidance. It's a ritual. The deeper one goes into the system, the less their name matters. At lower levels of the lodge, members still use their real names, their professions, and their hometowns. But from the 18th degree onward, and especially in higher circles, members receive ritual names. These aren't casual nicknames, they are part of a transformation of the self. These names are often taken from ancient architects, forgotten kings, or symbols in dead languages. A person might be known as Adoniram, Hiram Abiff, or simply D72. These names carry no literal meaning. Their purpose is to detach the individual from their old identity, from their social role, and turn them into a pure instrument for the lodge's purpose. In restored documents from old lodges in Germany and Scotland, one line reads, "A real name is a doorway, but a secret name is a hallway. And once you walk down the hallway, you must not turn back." This isn't just symbolic, it's a real system. Many high-ranking Freemasons, when attending international lodges or secret communications, use only code names, symbols, and spoken passwords. No invitations, no member lists. Everything is stored in the memories of those authorized to remember. It's not just about avoiding surveillance, it's about protecting the principle that true power should never attach itself to an individual. In Freemasonry, who someone is matters less than what idea is being carried. A person may die, but if their name is passed on to another, the intellectual shadow remains alive. In the 19th century, when the Vatican and European governments began closely monitoring the lodges, many members began wearing masks during rituals. At first, it seemed theatrical, but the purpose was deeper. Even fellow members weren't supposed to know exactly who sat beside them. In that space there were no officials, no nobles, no clergy. Only nameless architects. Records from lodges in Italy describe rare meetings called three-mask rituals, where three individuals shared one ritual name, spoke one shared philosophy, and blurred the lines between person and idea. The question, who said it, lost all meaning. What mattered was, it was said. Modern researchers have tried to trace the real identities of high-ranking Freemasons, from revolutionaries to figures influencing global finance, but they all face the same problem. There's no data. Not because it was erased, but because it never existed under real names. In psychology, they say identity is the foundation of consciousness. But in Freemason philosophy, consciousness becomes truly free only when it's no longer bound by identity. So when you look back at history and you find anonymous gaps, unsigned decisions, architectural plans with no architect, know this. It wasn't an oversight. It was intentional because some people, to move the world, chose never to appear in its history. No Freemason symbols appeared on the flags of nations during the world wars. No declaration of war was ever signed in the name of Freemasonry. But behind the curtains of history, their shadow, whether denied or obscured, quietly lingered. In the world's defining moments, during World War I, as monarchies collapsed one by one, from the Russian Tsar to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, historians began to notice a pattern: the rise of republics, constitutional governments, and democratic reforms often involved figures who had ties to Masonic lodges. Georges Clemenceau in France, Woodrow Wilson in the United States, and Tomasz Masaryk in Czechoslovakia, all were known to be affiliated with major lodges. This doesn't mean Freemasonry orchestrated or controlled events, but clearly its ideals, personal liberty, secular governance, and rational order aligned with the post-war wave of democratization. As divine right monarchies crumbled, the world searched for a new value system, and the Masonic philosophy, quietly rooted in the 18th century, became the replacement. But by the time of World War II, Freemasonry was no longer a vague or abstract presence. It had become an official enemy. In Nazi Germany, as early as 1933, Hitler issued decrees banning all Masonic activity. Thousands of lodges were shut down, their books burned, members arrested. Many were sent to concentration camps, marked with a special red triangle bearing the word Freimaurer, Freemason. In fascist Italy, Mussolini also cracked down on the Brotherhood. One of the most aggressive purges targeted Lodge P2, accused of being not just Masonic, but a secret hub of resistance against the regime. Members were hunted. Rituals were confiscated. Records were censored. In Francoist Spain, Freemasons were labeled the invisible enemy. Franco believed they had fueled the revolutions. Dozens of lodges were outlawed, and many members were exiled or executed without trial. The question is, why did authoritarian regimes fear Freemasonry so deeply? Perhaps because Freemasons didn't carry weapons, they carried ideas, and in every totalitarian system, ideas pose a greater threat than arms. And yet what few noticed was this. After every war, when the dust settled, when constitutions were rebuilt, when freedom had to be redefined, the Freemasons returned, not publicly, not at the front of the stage, but quietly present. After World War II, lodges were re-established across France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Czechoslovakia, often by just a few survivors who came back. They didn't reclaim property. They didn't seek power. They simply began again, with a small room, a candle, a worn book, and rituals once labelled dangerous. Some former prisoners from Dachau and Buchenwald later recalled holding secret Masonic rites inside the camps, using floor tiles as makeshift altars, hiding a torn Bible in the sole of a shoe. For them, preserving the ritual meant preserving the self, in a place where everything else was broken. Today, many still debate. What role did Freemasons really play in the world wars? Were they champions of democracy or merely accidental victims? There are no official records, no declarations. But one truth remains. Wherever freedom is restored, the lodges light up once more. They do not need to win, they only need to endure. When the final gunshots of the World War faded into silence, the world was no longer the same. Empires had fallen, borders were redrawn, ideologies clashed. Yet in the haze of destruction, a certain force, dressed in no uniform, absent from every battlefield map, quietly went to work. They didn't rebuild the world with power. They rebuilt it with ideas. The Freemasons, in silence, began shaping a new order. No proclamations, no banners, no one elected them, yet many of those elected were among them. Let's start with the United States. George Washington, the first president, was an openly declared Freemason. He never hid it. In fact, he laid the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol in full Masonic ritual, wearing the apron, striking the stone 3 times, offering prayers, and presenting the square as a symbol of justice. Many other founding fathers were lodge members too: Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere. But what matters isn't who they were, it's what they embedded into the political structure of the new nation: individual liberty, separation of powers, inalienable human rights, a secular government. These weren't just revolutionary slogans. They were ideas that had been debated for centuries within Masonic lodges across Europe, from England to France to Scotland, where Platonic philosophy was studied beside geometric diagrams and ancient rituals met Enlightenment reason. Look closely at the US dollar, and you'll find a story beneath the surface. The unfinished pyramid, the all-seeing eye, and the Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. An order not built on thrones or crowns, but on reason, freedom, and the architecture of thought. After World War II, as the world sought balance once again, global institutions emerged: the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization. Those who laid the foundations, from Franklin D. Roosevelt to European diplomats, were said to be directly influenced by international lodges. Not all were members, but many had once been guests, exposed to humanist, universalist ideals, long held by the Freemasons that all people are born free and equal, and that progress comes from knowledge, not blind faith. Once again, they did not lead from the stage, they didn't claim the spotlight, but the principles they preserved quietly found their way into charters, constitutions, and international codes of law. Still, the new world they helped shape was not a utopia. It remained fractured, unjust, and conflicted. The Freemasons never claimed to control humanity. They merely tried to lay the first stones carefully, so that others might continue to build. Because for them, the most important structure isn't a temple, a palace, or a monument. It is the spiritual order of a world governed by reason, a world where, even if light cannot shine everywhere, at least it is never completely extinguished. And that is why, despite being called a secret society, accused of conspiracies and hunted for centuries, the Freemasons still endure, not to rule, but to build, not to lead, but to lay foundations. They do not need everyone to believe in them. As long as the structure still stands away, they fulfilled their purpose. In the heart of old European cities, there are doors you could walk past your entire life without ever noticing. They have no handles, no signs, no doorbells, just a patch of stone in a slightly different shade, a shallow carving, or a paper-thin, vertical slit on the wall of an aging church. They draw no attention, and that is the point. These doors have never been opened publicly, and some, according to those who claim to have seen them, don't appear to lead anywhere at all. One of the most famous examples lies beneath Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, a place believed to be the final stronghold of the Knights Templar before vanishing into legend. Behind the altar is a slab of greenish stone, seamless, without hinges. But when sunlight strikes at just the right angle during the summer solstice, an inverted triangle appears faintly on its surface, suggesting a hidden doorway. The chapel denies any passage exists. Yet in reconstructed Masonic maps from the 17th century, that area is marked with a strange letter, a reversed M, often used in high-level ritual manuscripts to signify a threshold with no return. In Paris, beneath the ground lies more than catacombs. Near Montmartre, an old wine cellar contains a sealed room, accessible only when the entire water system is shut down. Researchers found a rusted iron door, unlocked but immovable by ordinary force. One worker once saw a staircase behind it, then vanished. The area was sealed off. No one has entered since. According to members of Lodge Paris, that space was used for a threshold ritual, a moment when a Freemason officially relinquishes their identity to ascend into a level with no name. The door, they say, opens only once and never for return. In Washington, D.C., within Lafayette Square, stands a structure known as the House Without Windows. No windows, no residents. Public records list it as non-existent. Yet satellite imagery captures its shadow. And once, a year, on the night of July 4th, a single light flickers from within for exactly 7 minutes. No one goes in. No cars park nearby. But observers report that in that moment, a glowing, all-seeing eye briefly appears atop the roof and fades. When journalists tried to investigate, they were turned away by plainclothes security. No agency claimed ownership of the building. No name was ever given. What sets these doors apart is not their shape, nor their materials. It's how they seem to refuse to exist in ordinary terms. They are not locked, because they were never meant to open. They are not guarded, because those not invited will never see them. Some believe these are ancient lodge transfer stations, places where manuscripts, symbols, or perhaps only empty space was preserved to remind the initiated of something deeper. That another order exists, quietly watching. Masonic legends call them silent recesses, spaces where no light reaches, no voice echoes, and all symbols are stripped away. If a member is brought there, it means they have passed beyond the level of practice, into the level of acknowledgement. And once one steps through such a door, they are no longer a Mason, they become the idea itself. Today, many of those doors have been buried, sealed, or erased from the surface. But the oldest lodges still hold the maps, still speak of them, as a final test for those willing to look into the void, because some doors are not meant to be passed through. They exist only to prove one thing, that you are ready to accept the ultimate secret is not what lies behind the door, but that the door exists at all. Freemasonry has always been wrapped in suspicion, but for centuries that suspicion remained abstract, a sense that they might influence, that they might work from behind the scenes. Then came the 1970s and 1980s. Suspicion gave way to proof. Its name was Propaganda Due, or simply P2, a lodge once officially recognized by the Grand Orient of Italy. But what happened next forced Freemasons around the world to cut all ties. P2 began as a high-degree lodge, re-established after World War II. But under the control of Licio Gelli, a businessman, intelligence operative, organizer, and master, manipulator, P2 slowly transformed into a shadow state within Italy itself. Gelli didn't seek the spotlight. He rarely spoke, rarely appeared in public. Yet over the years, he recruited more than 900 powerful figures into P2, including generals, politicians, Secret Service heads, bankers, media tycoons, and even priests. The list of P2 members was discovered in 1981 during a criminal investigation into the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano. The list, printed on official lodge letterhead with names, ranks, and ID codes, became one of the most shocking documents in modern Italian history. Among the names, Italy's sitting prime minister at the time, Silvio Berlusconi, along with NATO generals and top media executives. Subsequent investigations revealed a vast underground network with one clear objective: to control Italy's political and financial systems through bribery, blackmail, and media manipulation. P2 was no longer a lodge. It was a power structure, accountable to no one. Behind the veil of Masonic ritual, it orchestrated actions such as buying off journalists and controlling public narratives, compiling blacklists of disloyal individuals, moving illegal funds through Vatican banks, organizing anti-revolutionary, armed cells within the military. One of the largest links in this web of crime was the massive collapse and money laundering scandal at Banco Ambrosiano. P2 used hidden Vatican funds to transfer assets through Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Latin America. When the scheme unraveled, the bank's chairman, Roberto Calvi, nicknamed God's Banker, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London in what was staged to look like suicide. The Vatican, dragged into the scandal through its financial institutions, suffered deep damage to its credibility. But deeper still was the blow to Italy's democracy. When the P2 list was made public, the people realized that for decades, elections, reforms, and even media investigations may have been manipulated by a secret network. The Italian government responded with emergency legislation declaring P2's operations illegal, banning all its members from public office, and ordering Freemasonry in Italy to shut down the lodge permanently. For global Freemasonry, long accused of secrecy, this marked one of the greatest crises of credibility in modern history. Lodges across Europe issued formal statements. P2 does not represent us. But the stain remained, not because all lodges were like P2, but because the world had now seen what happens when darkness no longer checks itself. To many scholars, P2 was not just a scandal, it was a warning that any system, no matter how idealistic at its origin, can be warped by ambition. When ritual loses its sacredness, when knowledge becomes a tool of control, when symbols are used to hide personal gain, then it is no longer Freemasonry, it is simply power, wearing the mask of philosophy. And when a lodge like P2 collapses, it doesn't just tarnish the name of the Brotherhood, it can take an entire nation down with it. Among the millions of Freemasons who have walked this earth, there are a few who never submitted an application, never studied the rituals from scratch, never swore an oath to prove loyalty, because their blood itself was the oldest oath ever. Given these are bloodlines passed down through generations, where in each era at least one is chosen, not to inherit wealth, but to inherit a symbol that has never shown its face. There is no official record that acknowledges this. Lodges publicly declare, all are equal in the light. But within the most private gatherings, in degrees, most Masons never reach, there exists a special circle of members known by an ancient name, keepers of the first light. According to internal legend, they are direct descendants of the first architects, not builders in the physical sense, but thinkers, theologians, and mathematicians from ancient Egypt, Babylon, and Jerusalem. These families do not boast. They do not always hold high office. They do not wear emblems or sit at the center chair. Yet in every ancient lodge there is always one, the quiet one, both witness and living memory. One of the most mentioned families in Masonic lore is the St. Clair line of Scotland, patrons of Rosslyn Chapel, where Templar marks and Masonic symbols remain undeciphered to this day. For over 600 years, someone from this lineage has served as a spiritual guardian of the local lodge. Another is the Colonna family of Italy, once intertwined with the Vatican and Renaissance scholars. Though stripped of political power, over the centuries they quietly preserved hundreds of secret manuscripts, underground libraries, and carved stone symbols dating back to the Templars. Some records even suggest they helped hide sacred relics from invading French forces during the Vatican's darkest hours. In France, families like the d'Aguilar, Jewish nobility who converted during the Inquisition, are still whispered about as key holders to the ancient southern lodges. Though their descendants no longer live in castles, they preserve liber architecturae, books of ritual variations only read during blood moon ceremonies. And the question is, why do these bloodlines persist? Perhaps because true architecture isn't made of brick and stone. It's made of symbols, memory, and duty. A lodge can be shut down. A document can be burned. But when a child of the St. Clair line hears the story passed from a grandfather's lips and is taken to an old stone vault to touch the symbol-marked rock, O33, an invisible thread continues to weave. In a letter recovered from the Alexandria Library in the 19th century, one line written in ancient Greek reads, "Not all lamps need oil to burn. Some only need a keeper." For these families, living on isn't about riches, fame, or survival. It's about making sure someone always remembers before the world forgets. Today, most modern lodges have long forgotten the names of these ancient lines, but every so often during a strange, silent ritual night, someone steps forward, saying nothing but a name that echoes from centuries past, and in that moment, the oldest Masons in the room understand. The light never dies, because the blood still flows, no noise, no need for glory, just the promise that it will never end. Since Pope Clement IV issued the In Eminenti decree in 1738, the Catholic Church has condemned Freemasonry as a dangerous heresy, a shadowy order defying divine authority. Over a dozen more papal decrees followed, each repeating the same warning: anyone who joins shall be excommunicated. And yet, a strange paradox has echoed through Vatican history. The more harshly the Church condemned Freemasonry, the more clearly its traces seem to appear within the Holy See itself. Let's begin with a quiet but curious event. In 1976, an Italian journalist, Carmine Pecorelli, well connected to both Vatican insiders and intelligence circles, published a list of 121 individuals suspected of being Freemasons within the Vatican. The list carried the code P2, believed to be a copy from internal records of the now infamous Lodge Propaganda Due. On that list were at least 5 cardinals, 12 bishops, and even the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the office responsible for guarding Catholic orthodoxy worldwide. The first question emerged: if the list was fake, why was Pecorelli assassinated just 2 years later? The Vatican never confirmed or denied it, but in that same year, an internal investigation is rumored to have taken place, the results of which were never released. What followed, however, was a wave of retirements, unexplained reassignments to distant posts, and disappearances from official Vatican directories. Among Catholic historians, there's a whispered legend that a Masonic ritual once occurred in a hidden chapel beneath St. Peter's Basilica, with at least one cardinal present. The ritual, they claimed, was not meant to oppose the Church, but to bind reason with faith. When it ended, the presiding figure carved a single phrase into the stone wall, and then vanished from the Church's hierarchy. The phrase read, "God does not fear the light, only those who create shadows do." Over the years, square and compass symbols and the letter G have mysteriously appeared, etched into stone corridors of the Vatican, only to be chiseled away without explanation. Some Latin manuscripts describe spiritual light rituals that appear nowhere in Catholic liturgy, yet mirror the structure of high-degree Masonic rites. One peculiar handwritten document found in the Vatican Library once read, "3 once stood, bearing marks of both worlds, and lit a candle in the darkness of the white stone." The translator suggested white stone meant the Vatican, but the identities of the 3? Unknown, or perhaps unspoken. The Vatican clergy have always publicly denied any connection to Freemasonry, but the world does not operate by denial. It operates by traces, and the traces remain. Cardinal once spoke of a sacred architecture within the soul, and was removed from his post overnight. A Spanish priest published an essay titled Faith and Geometry, and then was reassigned to South America for unclear reasons. A Jesuit monk once held an original manuscript of Giordano Bruno, the philosopher executed for believing that the universe was an infinite design. The manuscript vanished after the monk's death, so are there Freemasons inside the Vatican? The true answer doesn't lie in who was caught. It lies in who never needed to hide. If they exist, they are not enemies of the Vatican. They do not seek to manipulate the Church. They are simply those who guard a single, flickering flame inside a place long accustomed to the shadows of power. And perhaps, for them, the Vatican is not the fortress of faith. It is reason's final test. Every religion has its scripture, every nation has its constitution, but Freemasonry, a brotherhood that claims no God, pledges to no crown, has endured through a strange system of transmission, not through books, not through laws, but through scattered fragments, hidden in stone walls, painted on ceilings, and whispered in silence. They call it the language of light. Not a code, not a secret tongue, but a way of seeing the world, as if every shape held a second meaning, waiting for the eyes that could read it. Imagine stepping into an old room. No one is there, no papers, no books, just a wall bearing the symbols of the compass and square. To an outsider, it's geometry. To a higher initiate, it's the axis of spatial dominion. You see light streaming from a dome to the floor. They see the triple path of spiritual division. You hear 3 knocks at a door. They hear the rhythm of a ritual, from darkness to understanding. This language is not meant to conceal. It exists to filter. In an underground vault beneath the city of Munich, a strange map was discovered after World War II. It showed no countries, no place names, only a spiral radiating outward from a center, marked with triangles, circles, and crossing lines like a broken compass. Etched in tiny Latin letters at the corner, Loquitur qui tacet, videt qui non querit. The silent one speaks. The one who does not seek, sees. When placed under ultraviolet light, the map revealed a repeating sequence of symbols in mathematical form, coordinates aligning with ancient lodges from Jerusalem, Rhodes, Paris to Edinburgh. But at the center of the spiral, where all lines narrow inward, the coordinates vanish, replaced by a single symbol of the all-seeing eye, crossed by 2 black lines. Lower-level Masons were never shown the map. Mid-level initiates were told. It was a puzzle without an answer. But those at the higher levels knew the map leads nowhere, because it does not point to a place. It points to a moment, and that moment is not in history. It lives in the instant when someone first dares to ask, is everything I see distorted by how I've learned to see? The greatest language of Freemasonry has never been its visible symbols. It is how one relearns the world through 3 things: geometry, light, and silence. One member once said, if you ask, where is the truth? They will show you a symbol. But if you ask, why do we need symbols to ask? They will lead you to a blank wall and smile. In an anonymous ritual held in Prague in 1957, a young man was brought into a room with no windows. In the darkness, at the center of the floor, sat a single stone. On it was carved, "No map will ever lead you to the destination, but you are the map that someone else is walking through." The young man remained silent through the entire rite. When asked afterward how he felt, he said only, "I understood nothing, and that's how I knew I had begun." That silent map may still exist somewhere today, not in museums, not in sealed vaults, but perhaps in the gaze of a stonemason studying a form, or in the tiny pause between two knocks, or in the refusal to answer a question because the question itself is flawed, and that is why Freemasonry still endures. Through bans, burnings, exile, and centuries of silence. Because what they pass down is not words, it is the silence between the words. Official history keeps these three names apart: the Vatican, the Church, the Templars, the Warriors, the Freemasons, the secret society. But if we connect the timelines, cross-examine the symbols, and compare the rituals, a power triangle begins to emerge, one veiled by centuries of silence. This triangle isn't drawn on any map. It's etched into the very skin of Europe, from the stone temples of Languedoc to the holy cathedrals of Rome and the underground lodges of London, Lisbon, and Vienna. It all began in the 12th century with the Knights Templar, a military order born under the banner of holy war, but in truth, the world's first mobile bank, a transnational intelligence network, and perhaps the last guardians of ancient secrets from Jerusalem. The Templars became too wealthy, too independent, too close to royal court, something the Vatican could no longer tolerate. In 1307, Pope Clement V, under pressure from the French king, ordered the mass arrest of all Templars in France. Hundreds were tortured, burned alive, and stripped of everything they owned. But not all were destroyed. A branch vanished into the shadows. Some fled across the sea to Scotland, a land outside the Vatican's grasp. And there, according to ancient records, they did not vanish. They transformed. Over 2 centuries later, the Freemasons emerged publicly in England and Scotland, not claiming to fight for God, but for light, for the perfection of architecture, and for sacred order. But if one looks closely, many of their rituals mirror those of the Templars: the steps, the oaths, the sword symbols, the all-seeing eye, and the letter G inside the compass. One document from Edinburgh's ancient lodge includes a passage known as the Oath of Shadows, which reads, "We, the sons of those who bore the white cross, no longer fight. We rebuild what has fallen." Many researchers believe this line refers to a silent restoration of Templar memory, reborn under a new form: Freemasonry. The Vatican understood this. That's why, from the very first moment Freemasonry emerged publicly, popes issued excommunication. Not because Freemasonry was heresy, but because it was living memory of those once burned by the Church itself. Thus the triangle took form: Templar, power, secrecy, sacredness, broken; Vatican, authority, divinity, control, Freemason; memory, resistance, and secrets that survived. But this triangle was never still. It moved, era by era. During the Renaissance, the Vatican needed Masonic architects to build its temples. Structures like St. Peter's Basilica, while Catholic in purpose, bear sacred geometry known only to Freemasonry. During the Enlightenment, Freemason thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot openly challenged the Church, not with swords, but with reason. In modern times, the P2 Lodge revealed an inverse infiltration. Masons influencing the church from within, blurring, even reversing the lines between them. And perhaps the deepest truth is this: Freemasonry never truly defeated the Vatican. The Vatican never erased the memory of the Templars. The Templars were never reborn, but they never truly died. This triangle remains a fragile equilibrium between divine authority, rebellious intellect, buried memory. The world stays balanced only when these three vertices do not meet at once. But if, one day, all three lines converge at the exact center, then human history may be rewritten, not with a pen, but with a symbol. There is a little-known concept within Freemasonry: the silent keepers. They are not grand masters, they hold no voting power. But during the most sacred rituals, when high-ranking members recite ancient oaths, it is they who stand quietly in the background, saying nothing, doing nothing, only watching. Some old texts write, "The one who knows the most in the lodge is the one least spoken of." History does not record them, but traces remain. In 1896, in a remote village in Switzerland, a stone room was discovered after an avalanche. Inside, a wooden table, 4 chairs facing inward, and an engraved symbol, an inverted triangle with 3 small circles. This symbol appears in no official Masonic texts, but beneath it in Latin was the inscription, "We do not teach, we keep." Researchers believe this was a micro-lodge, a rare kind of lodge not built to grow, but to preserve lost or forbidden knowledge. Such lodges have no permanent headquarters. Their keepers live under everyday disguises: a gardener, a copyist, a cemetery keeper. They do not train in rhetoric. They train in disappearance. A declassified MI5 report from World War II released in 2003 described a nameless courier who appeared in 3 countries, always leaving behind scraps of parchment written in ancient Masonic code, foretelling air raids or coup attempts with startling accuracy. The figure was never caught, no fingerprints, no DNA, only known by an internal name, the Last Builder. In the 1960s, a French researcher named Jacques Perrin began a journey to trace forgotten lodges. He wandered through abandoned monasteries, ancient graveyards, and subterranean warehouses. In 1971, he published a single book, Those Who Do Not Exist. It documented 12 confirmed cases of Masons who lived their entire lives in secrecy, never revealing their identities. A month after its release, Jacques vanished. No sign of foul play, no farewell letter. Only his personal notebook mailed to his sister, with one final line: "If I disappear, know that I knocked on the right door, but why are such silent guardians necessary?" The answer lies in the true nature of high Masonic knowledge. It cannot be written, it cannot be spoken. It exists only in the deepest personal experience. And once revealed, it becomes distorted, weaponized, or worse, commodified. That is why the role of the silent keepers is not to guard knowledge like treasure. It is to guard knowledge from us. Today, they may still exist. In a quiet library no one visits, in an old print shop that hasn't sold a page in years, in a village where an old man carves wood daily, yet sells nothing. No one knows who they are, but if one day you happen to see someone wearing a ring, a square inside an inverted triangle, and when you ask, they simply smile and say, "I'm just the one who keeps the last door." In that moment, perhaps, you will have met one of the final keepers of silence. Among the thousands of symbols carved into buildings, seals, coins, and flags around the world, there is one that has never shut its eye, not for over 2 centuries, the Eye of Providence. Often dismissed as mystical, spiritual, or a conspiracy emblem, it still stands unwavering. At the top of the unfinished pyramid, on the US $1 bill, just beneath the Latin phrase Annuit Ceptis, Novus Ordo Seclorum. But the real question isn't what the eye is, it's why it was placed at the heart of the most powerful nation in the world, in an official context, and why no one seems willing to explain its true meaning. During the American Revolution, many founding fathers were known or suspected. Freemasons, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere. But even more enduring than their names was the structure they helped build, a legal system rooted in Enlightenment philosophy, ancient Greco-Roman architecture, and Masonic ritual. When the U.S. Constitution was ratified, many foundational laws were written in a three-tier format, mirroring the Masonic degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason. Laws were commonly structured in three parts: principle, application, and interpretation, just like the three symbolic walls of a lodge. Why three? Because in Freemasonry, three is sacred, representing wisdom, strength, and beauty, the pillars that uphold the universe, and a law that lacks one of these isn't a law at all, it's just control. But the influence didn't stop in America. In France, the Revolution of 1789 didn't just topple monarchy, it shattered the spiritual monopoly of the church. Inside the shadowed corners of Parisian lodges, men like Voltaire, Lafayette, and even reformist bishops exchanged symbols, manuscripts, and coded letters to envision a new rule of law, one based not on divinity, but on humanity. And, once again, the eye returned. This time, it was painted atop the 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, hanging inside the French National Assembly. At the center, among the articles of law, the all-seeing eye radiated from above. It did not belong to God, it did not belong to the king, it belonged to the people, those who had finally opened their eyes. And yet, despite its immense influence, Freemasonry never claimed credit for these laws. They etched no names into marble, they left no obvious symbols, except a few architectural cues, but the eye has always been there, unblinking, unfading, unspoken. In South America, revolutionary leader Simón Bolívar, who helped liberate multiple nations from colonial rule, was also a known Freemason. In his speeches, he often used phrases echoing Masonic ideas: spiritual architecture, a fellowship unafraid of truth, a world built not by violence, but by thought. Bolívar's monument in Venezuela, when seen from above, is shaped like a traditional lodge layout, three converging lines pointing to a blank circle at the center. But at sunset, the sun casts its light through a narrow slit in the stone, illuminating a hidden inscription on the floor: Lex Lux Veritas, law, light, truth. But light, like law, is fragile. It can be bent, distorted, weaponized. The eye sees all, but it does not intervene. It simply reminds us. Even the fairest law without spiritual awakening is just paper. That is why Freemasons have never claimed to write history. They build the tunnel, so truth has a path. They light the lamp, so those with courage may see the way. And they place the eye above, not to intimidate, but to remind those who write laws, who pick up the pen. There is something watching, not to judge, but to whisper that what they do can change the course of the world. There is a form of control that needs no violence, no propaganda, no censorship. It simply makes people unable to remember what was ever real. The modern world is built on data, from social media, digital maps, browsing history, to medical records. What we read, watch, believe is all stored and sorted by invisible algorithms. But strangely, the more we store, the weaker our collective memory becomes. No one is truly sure anymore what really happened. Information is edited, ranked, recommended, and finally forgotten. This was something that high-ranking Freemasons foresaw as early as the 18th century. A member named Giuseppe Galletti once wrote in a secret letter to the Paris Lodge, "It is not fire that destroys truth. It is the endless stream of things that look like truth." Inside the private archives of the Grand Lodge of London, there exists a strange document titled The Architecture of Natural Silence. Written in archaic English, it describes a model of the world built not on belief or law, but on intentional forgetting. Every symbol, it says, is not made to be remembered, but to mark what will soon be replaced. Every monument, every crisis, every media war are bricks in a massive structure where nothing important lasts. And in that structure, the Freemasons are no longer a secret society. They are a memory buried inside society's short-term attention span. Today's world erases history on its own. Articles vanish, timelines refresh, events get replaced, names disappear from the trending feed. There is no need to burn books anymore. We have simply stopped remembering. There is no censor, no dictator. We are the ones who choose to forget. In 2015, at a closed-door gathering in Vienna, a group of scholars, engineers, and former European Lodge members issued a warning. Digital storage can no longer preserve ideas. It keeps images, sounds, numbers, but cannot hold on to meaning, context, or spiritual depth. One of the speakers, a former keeper of symbols, quietly said during a private conversation after the event, "Sacred symbols were once built to resist time. Now they decorate social media posts, and so they do not die, they are digested." Freemasons once survived popes, kings, and wars because they lived in spoken memory, ritual, and slowness. But now, in a world programmed for instant consumption and instant forgetting, the craft has no place. Because no one remembers how to learn slowly, understand deeply, or remain silent long enough. A world designed to forget needs no ruler. It only needs more, faster, and emptier. And in that world, the eye still remains, but no one looks up anymore, because our eyes are too busy scrolling down. The question is no longer who controls us, but rather, does anyone even remember that there was once something worth controlling? Some names are carved into stone, some events are written into textbooks, some organizations are labeled powerful, criminal, or heroic. But the Freemasons never called themselves any of these. They left behind no declarations of victory, no celebrations for what they helped build, and most of all, they never signed their names on the final result, because they never needed to win. They only needed to keep building. From the ancient stonemasons of Europe to the persecuted knights of Jerusalem to the silent thinkers hidden in underground lodges in Paris, to the revolutionaries drafting constitutions in Philadelphia, they all shared one thing in common. None of them demanded to be remembered. They asked for only one thing: let truth not die when we are gone. Today, the world looks at Freemasonry through 1,000 lenses: conspiracies, secret influence, hidden politics, superstitious symbols. But few ever pause to ask, if they were truly so powerful, why are they so silent? Why don't they appear in moments of celebration? Why don't they claim fame, position, or glory? Why do so many high-ranking members live quietly and die in obscurity? Why do true lodges forbid filming, interviews, or promotion? The answer lies in a short sentence from the new charter of the Edinburgh Lodge, dated 1743. A true builder does not raise temples for himself. And that's why in every age, in every civilization, there's always a shadow behind the great turning points. No banners, no throne, just someone with a blueprint, observing, suggesting, then stepping away. Not to control the world, but to help it stay in balance. We spoke of sacred cathedrals with no architect's name, constitutions shaped with strange geometric precision, revolutions that sparked at just the right moment, symbols no one dares to fully explain, and meetings with no photos, no transcripts, no trace. These are not marks of domination, they are footprints of builders in the dark, not ruling, but preparing. Not for today, but for generations not yet aware of what they'll need. Because the world will forget again. Empires will fall again. Truth will be twisted again. And humans will keep searching for meaning in the chaos. But maybe, when it all collapses, a builder will appear once more, quietly picking up fallen bricks and beginning again, without name, without reward, without history, only with a blueprint, still intact after centuries. The Freemasons don't need you to believe them, and they don't fear being misunderstood because they know those who need to understand will seek, those who are meant to forget never will remember. But if one day you find yourself standing in ruins and notice a faint compass symbol carved in stone, know this: you were not the first to come here, and if you choose to build again, you will not be the last.